Hey, how do you feel about some high rarity cards, or maybe some foreign ones, or maybe be ahead of the game with others by preparing for future set releases with very quick shipping? Check out EJ Gaming and use code British5 on checkout for 5% off on all your orders. Link in the description. Greetings, duelists, and welcome to another video. This past weekend was YCS Bologna, which is our last major event of 2023. Our next possible event will probably start on 2024, and our format will probably change once more once it happens. Prior to this event, we had YCS Richmond. And I feel in order to properly bring up what happened in Bologna, it is a really good idea to cover what happened on Richmond and do a small timeline between that event and this one. One thing to remember is what kind of format we are in right now. After the release of Age of Overlord, we had a debacle on what would be the proper non-engine spots duelists should be occupying in their main and side deck. That deck building decision is super imperative for this format's success because despite the power level of some strategies, some being stronger than others, for the most part, we are in a non-engine format. I don't think there's a wrong approach of what non-engine choices you make on your deck. Just be more prevalent to understanding the current trends because some decisions could be more impactful than others. Uh, so YCS Richmond proved exactly that point that I stated, with Unchained winning the event. If we looked at Unchained as a strategy, it is not a deck with the highest ceiling, but it is a deck that has a really high resiliency to forms of disruption, and it also has the ability to play against hand traps. The one issue with this strategy is that it loses super hard to board breakers, and decks that have like a really strong resiliency against what they try to do with their strategy. In the other hand, we have other decks like Manadium, Mekanko, Infernoble Knights, and uh, Rescue Ace, which are a lot weaker against hand traps. However, they are a lot more stronger against board breakers. So heading to YCS Bologna, you have to balance between both choices of non-engine in order to be successful at that event. And as you will see later with the top cut and what decks were played at the event, you'll see that some duelists actually did incorporate that, and they made it very possible for that to be a thing. So another thing to note before discussing YCS Bologna is Valiant Smashers and Fire Kings Reloaded. Valiant Smashers introduced 3 archetypes, and out of those 3, we ended up having one successful one. That one being Centurion. I already made a thorough discussion of the strategy in this channel. The deck proved to have a really strong foothold in this format by winning and topping a good amount of regionals, OTSs, case tourneys. So that strategy is very straightforward. It's very minimalistic, but Crimson Dragon is part of their win condition, and that is very strong in a format like this one. They also have a really good amount of starters, and they can play through hand traps if they open multiple copies of those starters or a different combination of them. Uh, so prior to this event, Centurion was already proven to be justified in this format. Now we're gonna talk about the other elephant in the room, and that is Fire Kings. Fire Kings is a more interested topic of hand, because the support that we received was only TCG legal 1 day prior to the YCS, meaning that in order to be successful with this strategy at this event, you pretty much had to be forced to be practicing with the strategy beforehand at like miscellaneous tourneys or like online or with friends, etc. Like everything that was proven for Fire Kings to be successful was pretty much theory up until this event. now that I brought up everyone up to speed, we can talk about what's been going on in the format. So, one thing I'm going to say is that YCS Bologna was a very, very huge success. Nearly 2,500 players attended the main event, and the coverage team was phenomenal as well. We had many people seeing what was happening on by the streams. Whereas we also had a lot of good side events. We had a really lot of good side content in the YCS. We had interviews with really, really good players. We had deck showcases. We had the master versus caster, which is basically when the commentators face against pro duelists on past formats. We also had pro players actually explaining like top tier contending strategies. To give you some examples, Jessica Robinson did a showcase explaining the Rika deck. Ben, which is from Raid and Trade, did a really good showing explaining Rescue Ace. Joshua Smith also showcased Fire Kings and how the deck operates and performs. And funnily enough, a few of those players that actually took their time to do side content for this event actually ended up topping this event as well. So that just goes to show you that this format is very, very rewarding for people who just have knowledge of the decks and the strategies more than just having the proper deck or strategy with the proper ceiling. Now we're going to look at the deck breakdown and what was going on between rounds. After day one, we see that Unchained and Rescue Ace are tied to be like the most represented decks in the top tables. If you've seen those both decks in action in this format, you already know that their position is very, very well justified. Also, contending very well at this event was Tearlaments. I think Tearlaments was on a lot of people's radar to even win this event. The main reason is like it has a really good level of resiliency. Its Unchained matchup is really, really strong, as well as the matchup against a few other decks. And if this deck pops off at the correct times, it's just going to show a power ceiling that's just very, very strong against a lot of other contending strategies. You also see Labyrinth and Purely, as well as Bestial, like all doing well. I will talk about Bestial a little bit later. As far as Purely and Labyrinth, I think it comes to no surprise. These two have been really, really strong strategies this certain format. They've already proven their worth. So this is pretty much like something to be expected from day one. Now let's talk about day two. So on top cut, we have Rescue Ace at the top contending position with 14 spots. Then we have Tearlaments at second place with 10 spots. Then you have Labyrinth with 8 spots. Or 9, I think it was. Yeah, Labyrinth had 9 spots. Unchained has 6. And then we see Centurion, Fire King, and Purely all with 4 spots like in top cut. Between others, we have Vanquish Soul, Marinces, Rika, Kashtira, Dragon Link, the Runic Bestial deck, which we will talk about a little bit later, as I mentioned beforehand, Infernoble Knights, Mekonko, and Branded. So one thing to talk to bring from this event is Fire King topped, and that is super, super impressive considering everything I just mentioned beforehand. This is pretty much their first ever event where they get to be played being legal, and not only did it get 4 top spots, but 2 of them made top 32, and even one of them ended up winning their top 32 Fisher match, meaning that they arrived at top 16. That is super impressive. This pretty much goes to show you that Fire Kings have a really strong position in this format. already spoken about Fire Kings already in this channel. If you're interested on my thoughts on the deck as a whole, you should be able to find it in the channel. But going back to like Fire Kings and their position, I don't think this is a fluke. I think it pretty much comes down to like players like Kevin Neptis, which is the one on the screen, uh, pretty much practicing with the deck for a good amount of time and just being familiar with their matchups and like just overall showing a very strong like position. Centurions also making it to 4 top spots. It also doesn't come to a surprise. This deck has a little bit more showing competitively, so the people that were piloting the deck were probably very knowledgeable of what they were doing, like as a whole. Now, I talked about how Fire Kings made it all the way to top 16. Let's talk about top 8. So in top 8, we have Runic Bestial, which was covered by Joshua Smith. I will talk about that. We have Tearlaments, Rescue Ace, Infernoble Knight, Branded, and 3 Labyrinth players. I think it comes to no surprise that Labyrinth overperformed at this event. All the players at the top cut are all pro players. Like, I know that the 3 Labyrinth players I think were Dinkabui, Gabriel Nets, and I'm trying to remember the third one. But the point is, like, we have 3 really strong players, like, just piloting this deck. So the thing about Labyrinth is this deck is fairly strong against hand traps not named Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. The only other hand trap that really stops Labyrinth really strongly is Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, and that hand trap is not being played because it's not as strong against like the other decks in the format. This deck is also fairly weak to Bestials. However, like Bestials is not really the big issue against this deck. The big hand trap that they should watch out for is pretty much Ash Blossom. This deck is very adaptable to board breakers. It's very adaptable to like hand traps, as I mentioned beforehand. If this deck goes first, it has a very significant advantage, especially if you resolve the rotation between Ariana, Cool Clock, Lady Labyrinth, Lovely Labyrinth, and your welcome traps. If you've been on this channel, you already know that I've been piloting a Labyrinth hybrid, and I've been doing very, very successful with it. And it just goes to show you that this deck deserves a very top spot, like in contention. Branded is a very surprising one. However, Branded has risen in popularity in the past month. At least in the past few weeks, I've been seeing it pop up a little bit more than usual. And the thing about Branded is it has a very, very, very solid win condition. It is a very high ceiling deck. And if you don't get hand trapped or you don't get board broken like at correct times, you're just going to snowball advantage against your opponent. One big issue about Branded right now is that Typhon, like the Star Crisis, is a big contender against the matchup, and it is a card that should be in a lot of people's extra deck at the moment. It's also a deck that cannot play SP Little Knight, at least if you're playing Branded Fusion, which I will get to that. So sometimes being able to have that ability in your extra deck or not is a very, very significant advantage. Being another thing that really helps Branded is that the popularity of Dimensional Barrier has like sunken down. Like outside of Labyrinth, you're probably not going to see Dimensional Barrier in a lot of people's decks, and that is one of the biggest issues for Branded. So as long as that card is like shifted out of the format, Branded should be able to do well at events moving forward. So I don't think I need to talk about Rescue Ace and tier elements too much. Those decks are very well deserved on their spots here. Pack made it to top 8 with Inferno Noble Knight. I think it comes to no surprise that Pakawat is pretty much like the resident Inferno Noble player that we pretty much have for the current format. He has been playing the deck very, very extensively. He already shown and proven that he's comfortable with the strategy, and if he's comfortable enough, he can do very well with it. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Joshua Smith's Bestial Runic deck. So, for those who don't know, Joshua did play this deck on stream, like I say a little less than 5 days prior to the event, and the funny part is, it wasn't even like a meta choice or decision for the TCG. He actually built it for Master Duel, and after he was playing it in Master Duel, he pretty much just crafted the deck for the TCG, and he just made a few changes. At the time of this recording, we still don't have his list. One thing that I know that he was playing was Duality, which is a spell card that I've talked about in this channel in the past. I will link that in the description. One other thing that we know about Joshua is that he side deck Denko Seka, which is another card that I also talked about in this channel. I will probably link that as well. So let's talk about the deck. So when it comes to Joshua Smith, he has a really, really good track record of topping and winning major events with a runic hybrid. He won worlds with the Naturia runic deck, even though that was on Master Duel format. He won YCS Utrecht last year with runic sprite. He has topped YCS with the runic Life Twin deck as well as the runic Furhire deck. So when it comes to runic as a whole, I think, in my personal opinion, like Joshua Smith is pretty much one of the best players out there that knows how to pilot this deck, because runic as a whole is not a very easy deck to pilot as a non-controlled deck. Joshua has been very vocal to the OCG, saying that runic should be played more as a combo strategy and not just as a stun strategy to just take out your opponent. But the issue with that is you need to learn how to navigate your turns, you need to navigate your disruptions, like play against what opposing disruption your opponent has. Also, losing a battle phase is a really, really big deal, because like you could end up going into time more often than not. Now let's talk about like the really big benefits of the strategy. One thing is, this deck can play both board breakers and hand traps at a consistent basis. What do I mean by that? So the runic spells are pretty much part of your engine. However, they also serve as disruption and cards to help pick apart your opponent's board. Joshua Smith winning this event was to no surprise. If we go back to the top 8 and we see like the top 8 strategies, his Labyrinth matchup is very, very strong. Joshua said it on his player interview when he won his top 8 that the reason he did so well was not because he was drawing the best hands, it was because the matchups that he was facing were very favorable for him. Another thing is that this deck has a very well position to navigate through disruption. It has a really, really high ceiling, and it really doesn't need your normal summon, which makes it really strong for cards like Denko Seka to be like part of this equation. So overall, I think this was a very, very well deserved win. I think every single player that made Top Cut deserved to be here. The finals match between Joshua and I'm trying to forget. I'm trying to remember his name. Anthony Lopez. Uh, was a very very good game. It ended on a game three where Joshua just blew him out with hand traps. Those hand traps being Nibiru and two Bestials. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything to cover when it comes to YCS Bologna. Uh, is this an indication that the Bestial Runic deck should be like a contender to be worried about in the format? I don't think the Bestial Runic deck is a very, very high contending deck. I think this is pretty much a deck that a really, really good player piloted, felt super comfortable with, had an edge in his matchups, and just did very thorough understanding on what the format was. I think every single player that made top cut could have won it, not just Joshua. And the thing to take about this format is until we get our next TCG Forbidden Limited list, or until we receive like the new cards from the next following sets, this format pretty much stays as an heavy non-engine format, and format where supreme deck diversity is warranted, because a lot of contending strategies can just do super well if you are familiar with your matchups and just have the right cards for specific matchups. So that's it from me. I hope you found this video informative. I hope you found this to your liking and understanding. The next following videos are probably going to be videos for the probable next format, talking about new meta trends, stuff that you should be looking out for, because I really strongly believe that we're going to move away from the format that we are right now very, very, very soon. But until then, keep practicing and keep dueling.